Welcome into the 615 Sessions podcast on this Friday, July the 19th. Lovely to have you in for another episode of the show. First time guest co-host Lauren Walsh, WSMV Channel 4. Good enough to spend a little bit of her Friday afternoon here with us. Thanks so much, Lauren. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course, Buck. Happy to be on.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you did any opposition research before you came on the podcast. I don't know if anybody warned you about what these experiences are like, but hopefully it'll be pretty smooth sailing. Hopefully we won't start hopefully we do start some local media feuds, because I don't think there's a better way to kick off training camp than all of us going back and forth and bitching at each other.
Well, I mean, I love reality TV, and it's because I enjoy other people's drama. I don't need any that I'm involved in.
You're in an excellent business then for drama, because God knows professional is full of it. And of course, Lauren and Chris Harris, our good buddy over there at WSMV, cover all things Middle Tennessee sports, not just the Tennessee Titans, but Titans is what we are here to talk today. A quick reminder that the podcast is made possible by Zen Sports. Plug in that promo code ATOZTN, get up to $100 on your no danger first wager. Terms and conditions do apply, Lauren, before you bet. So make sure, if you've got a gambling problem, we allege that Teresa Walker has a gambling problem around here, called the Tennessee Red Line, 1-800-889-9789. Okay, so last Friday, without football, where we're talking about this, and Lauren's been on the job now for coming up on a calendar year since you started over at WSMV. I guess, what is your first year covering this particular team been like, and what is your kind of expectation when we get started with your second training camp here in Nashville?
Well, I will say the first year was great. It was certainly exciting with a lot of different things going down, coaching changes, and Derrick Henry leaving. So, I mean, we were not short on headlines, that's for sure. But for me, in my last market, I was in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and it was a great access market because we were about an hour and change away from Charlotte and Raleigh. So we would go down and cover the Panthers, home games, big events, coaching changes down there. However, having this proximity to the Titans and being the in-market station for them, and we do our Titans game day show, quick little plug, every Sunday morning.
With Mike Keith, with Coach Mack, sometimes with Jimmy Wyatt, the GOAT, of course.
That's right. We've got J-Dub on there with L-Dubs. I do my little interview with Jim. And that entire element of it, and being really hands-on, being at practices, even picking Coach Mack's brain at practice and being there on more or less a daily basis from training camp throughout the entire season has just been wonderful. I really love not only football and the NFL, but telling great stories and having the opportunity to observe things and ask questions kind of on a rolling basis and try and figure out, extra layers to these guys and the team has been really fulfilling. It's been awesome.
Well, that's good. That's good to hear, because they've been wretched while you've been here. And so I appreciate that you have that level of optimism, where the rest of us are, shaking our fist at them about running on
jaded.
first and second. Oh yeah, jaded. I mean, I'm too young to be this jaded about them, but a couple of losing seasons will certainly do that. So I appreciate that fresh perspective from somebody coming in on this thing. So now we head into training camp number 2 for Ran Carthon, training camp number 2 for Will Levis. So the vibes are much different. And I've been going back and forth this week on the radio show and doing it a little bit on the primetime show that we do here for A to Z, on the biggest questions that we have about the offense and the defense. How much that tone has changed throughout the course of the last 6 months, or how much those questions have been answered from where we started after the season ended, with a coaching staff regime change, with Ran Carthon becoming more of a general manager, I guess by promotion, than he was last year. And then, of course, the most important thing that they've gone all in around, the quarterback. So if I made you pick one thing that you are most curious about or most interested in seeing answered, offense, defense, coaching, special teams, whatever you might choose from, Lauren, what would you select?
I would say the defense, and I think maybe more specifically the secondary, because I mean, you're losing not just great players like Aziz Al-Shire, right, Danico Autry, but Aziz was a huge leader in the locker room, of course, a captain, but it just showed in the way he carried himself on and off the field. And you're losing guys like that, and even Sean Murphy Bunting, and just guys who got a lot of snaps. Let's say, like, regardless even of impact on the field, you need to fill that type of productivity. And Titans have made moves to quite literally fill those holes in the roster, but how well are those guys going to actually be able to earn jobs, compete, and especially in the secondary? I mean, we know Snead has had an injury history that is kind of progressing into the present to an extent. Maybe we'll find out more about during camp, as well as Jamal Adams. He has not played a full NFL season or even close to one in 2 years, 2 seasons.
2018 is the last time. We were still playing 16 games the last time Jamal Adams played.
It was a 16-game full season for him, right? And I think he played 12 games. What's going on, like 3 years ago now? So I think that there is definitely like some room for optimism based on Carthon and Callahan going out and getting pieces so that you have a reasonable level of competition during camp. But I'm curious to see how all of that pans out, and especially with injuries in that unit. Even at safety and guys like McCreary, Amani Hooker, well, they better stay healthy because I'm just definitely intrigued about the depth in that department and how much some of these players returning and new are going to be able to contribute.
Yeah, going back to L'Jarius Sneed's introductory press conference, Rand talking about him in some comments that we have here and available to us, to Lauren's point, because of course, with a huge acquisition like that, and they made several big acquisitions at the top of varying positional groups, right at the top of the marketplace, center, wide receiver, or tier 2 wide receiver, we'll say in the case of Calvin Ridley, and then L'Jarius Sneed. I kind of go back to these comments, Lauren, from Rand Carthon and kind of reemphasize how important L'Jarius Sneed, to your point, is going to be to this defense.
Does the trade and signing of Sneed move the needle for you this year? I mean, that seems to be a very large piece to this equation.
Yeah, I mean, it helps us tremendously out from a coverage standpoint on the back end. And, you know, if you guys know Denard and what he wants to do, I think the guys that we signed in Cheeto and LJ, I think they both, you know, fit what he wants to do from a coverage standpoint. And then having Roger here, you know, Roger's played outside, he's played inside, and so he fits as well. So it gives us, you know, a legitimate, you know, top 3 out of the gate, and we're going to continue to add guys. We're going to expect guys that were here last year to step up, you know, and earn those other spots. But we're bringing in scheme fits for what we're going to do defensively.
And the scheme fit part of that is curious as well, because I feel like a lot of Titans fans have just kind of resigned themselves to the idea that the Denard Wilson hire means they're going to bring over the Ravens defense. But the more I listen to that dude talk and go back and watch press conferences and stuff like that, getting ready for another, you know, round of press conference. Well, I guess not round of press conferences, the next 6 months of press conferences as football engulfs all of our lives. But he keeps messaging aggressive, attacking, all these things that make me think they're going to be a little more blitz heavy than a low percentage blitz team like the Baltimore Ravens defense last year, because certainly they're not built similarly. And with a corner that can play press that way, I feel like an aggressive defense with as thin as this roster is in terms of playmakers, known commodity playmakers, right? Jeff, Harold Landry, L'Jarius Sneed. These are, and Amani Hooker, Roger McCreary, you could probably consider them in that same vein, though there's probably tiers with those players that we've just named. Beyond that, somebody else has to emerge as special for this defense, I think, to be even close to league average.
Right, and you mentioned the blitz. You'd hope that you have somebody at the mic or just in that linebacker tier that can really burst through and be a consistent threat as well. And Gibbons is returning, and you know they've had
that reeked of confidence. Gibbons is returning. Yes, yeah. You speak though for Titans fans, I feel
right, like. and it's like, you know, Jack Gibbons. He seems like a really solid guy to have on your depth chart, and perhaps as a starter, he showed he could play that role last year. But I'm very interested as well about the linebacker core and what that's going to look like. And do they make a move to even beef up that room? Because losing Aziz, I just think it is a huge hit on multiple levels to what that unit can be. And I personally have a lot of optimism about Cedric Gray because I've seen him play when I was in the Carolinas, and I think he's really like a hard-nosed, gritty, ball-hawk kind of linebacker that you want on your team. But it's tough to say if that's going to translate to the NFL in a meaningful and maybe like eye test obvious kind of way. Can he go out there and be a difference maker and a playmaker and not just a snap getter on the team as a rookie, perhaps?
And then, to the offensive side, there is no question that needs more answering than the question of Will Levis. Are you buying or selling stock on the Titans quarterback in year 2?
Ooh, I would probably hold. I guess.
Oh, please!
I'm
the one wrong answer in this situation.
I mean,
terrible.
It's,
but also not unintelligent of you, because I think I think that a lot of people are just kind of like, optimistic, cautiously, maybe, kind of. I don't know. Atlanta game, 4 touchdowns, something like that.
And I mean, right. I guess you could say that in holding and sitting on that stock, maybe it leans toward buying more because even just what we've seen out of Levis this offseason and doing these skill position vacations with some of his wide receivers and even tight ends were out there. That is really encouraging. And you mentioned the 4 touchdown Atlanta game, and then there's the comeback against Miami, which wasn't exactly a clinic of football perfection, but it was a comeback.
They so got away with
comeback at Miami nonetheless.
Please.
Levis had a role in, and so when you look at those gleaming moments of his time last season, you're definitely like, okay, well, if he can do that or do that somewhat consistently, then the Titans have a fighting chance at least a 500 record, and which, as we saw last year, has you competing in the AFC South for a good chunk of the year. So I think all of that is encouraging to me. And it says a lot, I think, that you have veteran guys like DeAndre Hopkins being like, yeah, Levis, of course, is their quarterback at this point, but like, he's our guy. Like he's molded to do this, and we have chemistry with him and full confidence with him and the way he's taken on Callahan's playbook, and they're working on his mechanics. It seems like an everybody's on board type of situation. Perhaps that changes when the season starts and there's a not so great game, but I think there's definitely cause for optimism. I would lean toward optimism with Will Levis at this point.
Mm-hmm. As close to fence sitting as optimism will allow, but I appreciate that perspective, because it is such a fascinating thing, quarterback development, just in the league in general, because so many more of these guys get ruined because they land on shitty teams, because that's the way that the NFL is organized successfully for parity. The worst teams, the previous season, get the highest or the first shot at the best talent in the draft, the quarterbacks who go there. It's not always easy. In the case of Trevor Lawrence, Urban Meyer, a disaster in his rookie year. The Tua Tagovailoa and Brian Flores did not work out the way that clearly him and Mike McDaniel have. So it's not a perfect situation. And whatever Titans fans may have thought about the way that the Mike Vrabel tenure ended, and now heading into Brian Callahan, I think the reason that I would be more inclined to buy is just because for without a sample size, right? Because training camp, we haven't even seen them put pads on. Like, it's not real football yet, really. And even then, it'll take some time for them to ramp things up before they're allowed to have contact at practice and the Seahawks in for joint training camp, and it'll actually start to look more like the real thing. That they've checked all the correct boxes in theory, right? The offensive-minded, play-calling head coach with a history of quarterback development, whose father also happens to be, if not the best offensive line coach in professional football going right now, one of the best when you mention those names, and a group that they've tried to invest heavily in the offensive line after years and years and years of malpractice, frankly, at the various position groups from across the board. And that goes back to obviously Rand's predecessor in John Robinson. So and the skill players, all of it. Lauren, I know that this has been your first year, but wide receiver for this franchise is cursed. It's a cursed position.
I'm aware of the history. Yeah,
they have been, right. I'm sure, obviously, but there's nothing there in my lifetime that would have made me look at a Titans wide receiver depth chart and say, oh my God, are they deep at wide receiver? Might that be the deepest position on the roster? And you could make the case for it this year. So that is, because it's good enough around him, I feel like that there can be enough based on the talent that's there. But the thing that has to be discerned, and this is a make or break season for him, even though it's only year 2, is he someone that can elevate a roster, good, bad, or indifferent? And you could make the argument that he did elevate a bad roster last year. He did more with it than Ryan Tannehill was able to in the sample size that we had with him before he got injured. And I think I'm buying because of the traits, because of the skill set, but also because they've done all the correct things theoretically around him to allow him to make some kind of meaningful step. They could miss the playoffs, right? They could still finish 3rd or 4th in the division, and you still come away from this season feeling like, all right, they made strides with Will Levis here.
Yeah, for sure. And when you look at last year's stats, even like from a bird's eye view, you got Nick Westbrook-Akine, who I personally really like in terms of, a guy who we interview and he's gracious with his time and his answers. But, when he's up there for receptions and touchdowns on your team, along with even just guys they had along last year, of course, Hopkins was there too, but the Titans needed a lot more wide receiver, to your point. And they went out and got that, to Carthon and Callahan's credit. So I'm also interested to see if Will Levis can make his teammates better. Like, we're not looking at a LeBron first title, in Cleveland type of scenario where he's got to drag along, a bunch of kind of ho-hum guys with him. But I mean, excuse my New England fandom. We saw Tom Brady do iterations of this over the years, where he maybe had guys who were aging veterans, where it was like, okay, this is how we're going to play. I'm going to get you the ball, and we're just chugging along down the field, and bring those types of people along with him with a wide array of skill sets and age across the board. They're certainly going to need contributions at tight end too. Even though it was just OTAs, everybody was raving about Josh Wiley and the changes he's made to his body and his approach this offseason. Of course, Chig is going to look to have a more impactful season, and they bring on Nick Vannett. So I'm really interested to see what the tight ends do, because for much of last year, they were a largely non-existent part of the offense.
No, Chig was terrible for 3/4 of the season. It was, and whatever the reasons might have been, right? Because he's talked about, he's all but said out loud that he's benefiting from a change of scenery around him, and there were plenty of players in previous years' teams that also got that kind of hard coaching from Mike Vrabel, and not everybody is built to handle it. So I think Chig might have been more impacted by something like that. And so we'll see. This is another opportunity, right? There are so many opportunity stories on this roster, with so much of it turning over, with Ryan Tannehill gone, with Derrick Henry gone, with the kind of last vestiges of that regime, that last successful Titan cycle, I guess, even though that didn't end successfully. And you would have liked to seen just generally more competitive football, certainly more than, I think they averaged 17.5 points per game over the course of the last 2 seasons. And I don't think you have to apologize for being a New England fan at all. They just happen to see a fan on here, Lauren. I won't be a fan of their football team, so they're too busy yelling at me about it the last 8 years. I think they're just happy to see a fan, to give a fan's perspective on something. But to your point about Tom Brady, they seem to have a connection, Levis and Brady. There's a lot of Brady comments about Will Levis right there. And I know Brady has now done this thing where he meets with a lot of the upcoming draft prospects, and I think, is it the dude from Fanatics Michael
Rubin.
Michael Rubin
in those meetings for who knows what reason,
and also Travis Scott, for whatever Travis Scott, hugely successful. Maybe he has something to provide the conversation that I'm not giving.
Oh, wasn't Jay-Z in one of them too?
He would. Maybe so. Again, Tom Brady knows people. whoever Tom Brady wants to invite to these meetings, they probably have a better, far be it from me to question who Tom Brady brings to these things. Point being, I think the Brady stuff, I'm curious as to what Brady sees in Will Levis, and he's been asked this question in some form or fashion, but I don't think that's inconsequential. I don't think that's just a veteran quarterback saying nice things about an upcoming guy, because Brady could have said that about a lot of different dudes, and I see more comments from him about Levis than just about anybody else.
Yeah, and I mean, even when at least when I was looking at Levis last year and he was coming in as a rookie in camp, and I started first or second week of camp, was just out there, thrown out there.
Always fun. Just go out there, cover the football team.
Yeah. At my first day at the station, I was out at camp. So I was out there, and I remember looking at Levis and thinking, wow, I don't know if, at least in person, and again, been to however many Panthers games as well as other, whatever at this point, field level, let's say. So I was like, I don't know if I've seen a quarterback with his build. And I thought his lower body seemed so sturdy and strong that I thought that would perhaps bode well for stability. Now, of course, he has the high ankle sprain that he dealt with more than once. So maybe that's not the effect, and it could be the Zion effect, where like he's so stocky in his lower body that it's not exactly the right like composition for what he's going.
I mean, Jeff Simmons has talked about playing at different kind of weights because it's easier. I mean, you have to adjust to how your body changes, how your body ages, whatever the case might be.
And it's not to say he's a big guy in that way, but I just thought, like, you see some quarterbacks like a Lamar Jackson type, and of course he's built to run. But Lamar, like, he's just so skinny, and Levis just seems so much stockier. And I think if he's kind of able to come into his own a little bit, and I don't know if it's a confidence thing or maybe this playbook will bode better for him to kind of get the ball out faster and more frequently. And we know Mike Vrabel liked to run the ball a lot, so maybe Levis is going to have more opportunities to really sling it. But to your point, I just wonder if it's even like a body potential kind of thing that Brady sees. Like, wow, this guy is really like built for a dynamic game, that he can run, he can throw, he has the accuracy and the arm strength, that if all of these things click for him, he could be a real threat.
Yeah, I'd like to see him use his legs a little more, honestly. He was a bit, I mean, understandably a bit cautious in everything in his offense because you bring up the high ankle sprains, and maybe that has something to do with his body composition. And clearly, I think in the offseason we saw, his biceps look physically smaller than they did last year. And I know Teron Davenport, our colleague at ESPN, was talking to his QB motion coach about helping him throw more with his base, his core, as opposed to just, jacked up, winging it, red face, screaming down the field, the way that we've seen him do a couple of times in these big moments. Because confidence doesn't seem to be any kind of an issue for him at all. In fact, if there's anything that I'm curious about with his personality, it's how is it necessary for him to kind of level out a little bit, and what does that look like as he heads into year two? We'll wrap up with the only thing that's happened locally with the Titans that's changed at all, which is Derrick Henry chirping another one of our colleagues, Paul Kaharski at paulkaharski.com, because there was a report from The Athletic from Dan Pompei, or as a part of Dan Pompei's profile on Derrick Henry. There was a bit of reporting in it regarding a trade that general manager of the Ravens, Eric DeCosta, and general manager of the Tennessee Titans, Rand Carthon, had agreed to in principle to trade Derrick Henry to Baltimore at the deadline for a 4th-round pick that could have been a conditional third based on production. There has been a lot of back and forth about, did the Titans make the right decision? So we'll start there before we bring up the tweet itself, because I heard Paul's radio show this morning, and I heard what his commentary on it was, and I think there's some fair context in there that gets lost on social media. But from your standpoint, having this been your first year on the beat, but understanding the history of Derrick Henry, the Titans, and the way that fans clearly view him, do you think it was right to keep him at the deadline the way that Pompei reported people in the Titans organization nixed the deal?
I mean, if I'm a Titans fan, I would say no, even though, like, of course you want Derrick Henry to stay and you want them to figure something out. That just didn't feel like it was going to be the case. And it didn't take that final game quasi farewell at the podium to feel like like Henry's not even really giving the vibe in his kind of moot answers like there's a good shot he's going to come back. So I would think you might as well get something for him while you can, instead of just letting him walk and go sign with the Raiders, which was something the Titans were seemingly privy to, like you said, based on the report anyway, in Baltimore's interest. So as a fan, I mean, I'd be like, well, it feels like he's going to go regardless, or that the Titans aren't really in a dire position to keep him, and there doesn't sound like there's a ton of urgency, and we're just getting these kind of like PR answers about Henry. So I would have liked to see him move before the deadline in that scenario, because I think the way it played out wasn't fantastic for people who are fans of Derrick Henry, everybody who knows him and appreciates him around this area. To see him go like that, I think it had a little bit of just a sour taste to it.
Yeah, and if you wanted to make the emotional argument, which rare for me to make the emotional argument, but him beating the Jags again is something that Titans fans particularly enjoy. Them keeping the Jags out of the playoffs is a nice feather in your cap, right? But in the long term, if you're actually a fan if you're a rational fan of the team, let me say this: if you're a rational, you can be an irrational fan. There's nothing wrong with being an irrational fan. But if you're a rational fan of the team, the correct answer is get the picks, right? Because what did they do with 3rd and 4th round picks? They traded a 3rd round pick to get Will Levis. They traded a 4th round pick to get L'Jarius Sneed. It's not just about the nebulous future college football player that you might have. It's about leveraging your position in a year where, I mean, whether you go into it trying to be meaningfully competitive or not, once you realize the season is lost, and I think by the trade deadline, we sure should all realized that the season wasn't going anywhere based on what they were able to do or not do. You try and move as many parts as you can for assets to try and jumpstart this thing organically, as opposed to what they had to do this year because of a lack of they just didn't overwhelmingly have that much draft capital. You have to spend $92 million on Calvin Ridley when the better thing is to try and find cost-effective players. You have to spend money on a center that's with the most guaranteed money a center's ever gotten in NFL history. You have to spend, what was he making, 17 and change $1 million a year in L'Jarius Sneed on that extension, I believe, somewhere in that ballpark, which is fine because you have to get to meaningfully competitive, but ultimately you can't keep doing it that way. At some point, you have to draft well, and this team has suffered mightily in the last 3 years of John Robinson from just malpractice in the draft and meaningful picks, day 1 and day 2 picks, top 100 picks, not panning out here, save Roger McCreary.
And there were rumblings about Vrabel's job around that time. So if you're the Titans and, like you said, you're looking to the future, and that was an opportunity to build an asset for the next head coach, or if you stay with Vrabel, well, they're still going to need a whole lot of change and new players to come into the mix anyway, because of what we saw on the field last year. So I think with the way the Titans were moving, that would have been the right call. And yeah, Derrick Henry went out and beat the Jags for that last time, like you said, but there's that joke, like, are you going to hang a banner of Derrick Henry beat the Jags and kept them out of the playoffs that one last time? It might be recency bias that Titans fans are going to appreciate that a little longer than they might, because it's going to be their last little hold to Derrick Henry. But I think in the grand scheme of his time as a Titan, that, that's irrelevant if you want your team to be competitive in the future, and especially next season if possible.
Yeah. And, from what I understand, it wasn't just about, the value of Derrick Henry or Derrick Henry finishing as a Titan. They wanted to give people reason to still buy tickets. They're running a business. And the only damn reason to show up to watch a Titans game last year was Derrick Henry.
All those jerseys in the stands say something. Yeah.
Sell a few more. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Before he's gone, let's sell a few more, and let's try and squeeze every last dollar out of this dude beyond just draft picks. So to Kaharski's tweet, because they were having this discussion this morning that I heard driving in to work. If you root for Derrick Henry to the extent that you want the Ravens to win so much as a single game, you are not the Titans fan you think you are, period. Not up for debate. If they are on the goal line at the end of the game, they are trailing by 4, and you want him to score, you are not the Tennessee fan you think you are, to which Derrick kindly responded, Paul, go find something to do. Now, the discussion was born out of, do you root for the Titans or do you root for Derrick Henry? Can you root for both? Whatever. And I understand Paul's point, but I don't think that, like, at least from my perspective, Lauren, fandom doesn't exist that way anymore. Like, you don't think as many people are as fans of individual players. Hell, there are so many Titans fans that are Alabama football fans exclusively because of Derrick Henry's presence here, right?
Yeah.
So I think that the definition of fandom is kind of like the allegiances have kind of softened a little bit that way. You don't have to root for the Ravens to root for Derrick Henry.
Yeah, I think when you have a player of Derrick Henry's caliber and longevity that he had in Tennessee, it's hard not to root for him in his next stop, because he did everything and anything he could for this franchise to help them win. And they got as far as the AFC title game. And that's something to hang your hat on as a Titans fan. And that was a great season that Henry was a big part of. So I just think that once the player has moved on to a new team and they've put in that amount of time, I think it's natural as a sports fan to want that player to do well. You feel a personal connection to them. For instance, A.J. Brown, I mean, he wasn't here to any extent of the same time that Henry was. And I don't think Titans fans are like, well, heck yeah, we want to see A.J. Brown torch the Commanders and go out and have an MVP season. It's not the same as just any player going to a new team. And you probably do root for the demise of a lot of players that leave your team and especially go out and have a better year with somebody else. But I don't think that applies when you're talking about a franchise player, a face of your team. And Tom Brady goes to the Bucs, and everybody I knew back home. Now, my fandom is a little diluted in covering this, but I get the perspective. Everyone back home wanted Tom Brady to do well. And when it got to the point of, he could win a 7th ring and further solidify his legacy as the best quarterback of all time, that only bodes well for his time in New England and the entire lens through which we view his career. And I think the same applies to Derrick Henry if you're a Titans fan.
That's excellent nuance and analysis. She even avoided taking a shot at Kaharski, which we'll find a way to do at some point. In a future appearance. Your maiden voyage on the podcast. We won't have you take anybody out. We'll save that for next time.
Sounds good. I mean, I enjoyed it for the midsummer social media cinema.
Yeah, it's just something to do to get us through this last damn Friday without football, because God knows I'm running out of things to talk about. Lauren Walsh, WSMV Channel 4 is where you can watch her and Chris Harris and their excellent sports coverage. You can follow her at Low Walsh or Lau Walsh, LAUWALSH 10 on Twitter, on Instagram too.
On Instagram, it is law_Walsh. So real quick, in Boston, we pronounce my name Lauren. I don't expect the Southerners to adapt to that. No problem. Everyone calls me Lauren, but my nickname back home is Law. So that's what the LAU is supposed to be presented as. Law Walsh.
Well, listen, we'll bridge the divide. If they can accept Kaharski as a Northeasterner, that you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Lauren Walsh, WSMV Channel 4. Appreciate your time. Thanks for hanging out here with us on the podcast.
Thanks,